The Bible goes silent on Jesus from age 12 to 30, and even his childhood barely shows up. That is not a cover-up. It makes sense. In this video, we will go over what has changed my mind. Before we dive into the missing years, remember to click your buttons, subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you don't miss more deconstruction videos. Most people assume there was a full biography of Jesus and parts were lost or censored. That's why myths stepped in. One says he studied in Egypt's mystery schools, rooted in 19th century Freemasonic ideas and the occult revival. Another claims he traveled east to India or Tibet. This comes from Nicholas Notovich's 1894 book, The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. He said he found a Tibetan manuscript, but historians traced it back to his imagination, and the monastery itself denied any such text. There's also the idea he trained with the Essenes at Qumran, learning secret rituals. But that theory was invented by 20th century speculative writers, not 1st century evidence. And then you have modern New Age versions, sacred geometry, energy healing, cosmic initiations. Most of those ideas come from 20th century spiritual movements like Theosophy and Levi Dowling's the 1908 book, The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, which he claimed came from the Akashic Records. Intriguing stories. But here is the key. None of those legends come from the 1st century. If we really want to know where the story begins, we have to look at the earliest sources themselves. The first gospel ever written, Mark, doesn't include a birth story or any mention of Jesus's childhood. It begins with John the Baptist preparing the way and Jesus stepping into the Jordan River to be baptized. That's the moment his public ministry begins, and that's the point where people first started paying attention. Later, writers like Matthew and Luke wanted to answer new questions. If Jesus was the Messiah, people expected him to come from Bethlehem, not Nazareth. So Matthew tells one story. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, then fled to Egypt. Luke tells a different story. Jesus' parents traveled to Bethlehem for a census, and he's born there. These accounts don't match, but both were written to explain the same problem. Luke also adds one scene from his youth. At 12 years old, he amazes teachers in the temple with his questions. John, written even later, takes it to another level. In the beginning was the Word. That pushes Jesus' origin all the way back to before creation itself. So it wasn't that we lost a complete biography of Jesus. The story grew backward over time, starting with his ministry, then filling in details about his birth, childhood, and finally his cosmic origin. This wasn't unique to Jesus. Ancient writers often skipped over early years and focused only on the public mission. Take the philosopher Socrates. The earliest accounts tell us nothing about his childhood. They describe his teachings, his debates, and finally his trial and death, or the Emperor Augustus. Roman historians focused on his rise to power, his victories, and his rule. His youth is barely mentioned. Even Moses in the Hebrew scriptures appears suddenly as an adult confronting Pharaoh. His birth is told briefly, then the story leaps forward to his mission. That's how biographies worked in the ancient world. The ordinary years weren't recorded, so the silence about Jesus' teens and 20s was not necessarily censorship, it might just be normal. So what most likely stilled those silent years? Real life in Galilee was simple but demanding. Jesus grew up in Nazareth, a small hill village with maybe 200 to 400 people, clustered in stone homes on the slopes. Families shared courtyards, ovens, and water cisterns. Daily life meant farming, hauling water, tending animals, and repairing tools. But only an hour's walk away stood Sepphoris, a booming city under construction, filled with Roman-style theaters, villas, and mosaics. This was the kind of place that needed skilled tradesmen. That's where the word tekton matters. It meant builder, not just a carpenter, but someone who could work in stone, wood, and basic construction. A young man like Jesus may have learned to cut limestone, shape beams, and repair roofs. Picture him walking the dusty road with his brothers, carrying tools to a job site in Sepphoris, working alongside other laborers, then returning to Nazareth to help feed a large family of brothers and sisters. Language was part of daily survival. At home, Jesus spoke Aramaic, the common tongue of Galilee. In synagogue, he heard Hebrew, reading from the scriptures. And in nearby Sepphoris, Greek was everywhere in trade and construction. Education wasn't like a classroom today. By his teens, Jesus could read, question, and debate. That's exactly what Luke shows in age 12 when he amazes the teachers in the temple. Archaeology helps us see what the silent years look like. In Nazareth, digs have uncovered first-century homes and shared courtyards where families baked bread together. Just 4 miles away, Sepphoris tells a different story. Archaeologists uncovered a Roman theater, grand villas, and mosaics like the famous Mona Lisa of Galilee. Put it together and the picture is clear. The ordinary grind of Nazareth, mixed with the booming growth of Sepphoris, explains those missing years. Here's how the story really unfolds. At age 12, Luke tells us in chapter 2, verses 41 through 52, that Jesus amazed the teachers in the temple with his understanding and his questions. That is the only glimpse we get of his youth. His teens and 20s are silent in the Gospels, but historically they would have been filled with ordinary life. Working as a tekton, a builder, traveling for work, supporting his family, and living the rhythms of Galilee. Around age 30, Mark chapter 1 verses 9 through 11 records his baptism in the Jordan River by John. That's exactly where the earliest gospel begins its story. Later, Matthew chapters 1 and 2 add a birth story, including the virgin birth, the visit of the Magi, and the flight into Egypt. Luke chapters 1 and 2 tell a different story, the Annunciation to Mary, the census under Caesar Augustus, and shepherds at the manger. These accounts don't line up, but both were written to answer questions about where the Messiah should come from. And then John pushes the story back even further. In chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, he writes, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That takes Jesus' origin all the way back to creation itself. So the tradition didn't begin with a lost biography. It began with his ministry, then grew backward over time to a birth, to a childhood scene, and finally to the dawn of creation. The quiet years aren't a cover-up. They're exactly what we see in other ancient biographies. Ordinary life simply wasn't recorded. Believers may see meaning in that silence. They'll say it shows Jesus shared the same struggles and routines as everyone else: work, family, and faith. But from a skeptic's point of view, the silence is telling. It means no one thought to write anything down until decades later, after legends had already begun to grow. And maybe that's the point. What you think the silence means depends on the lens you bring to the story.